Hello everyone, this is Shannon Clark with Babies After 35, and I am going to chat with a fellow donor egg mom today about what it's like to have babies from donor eggs. So she's going to be joining me here soon. Let me just see if she's on. Hold on. There we go. I'm going to ask her. Should be connecting. Hi there, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, do you have headphones in or no?
I don't.
But you know you're sideways. Did you mean to be
I
sideways?
don't.
Yeah.
Nope.
There you go. That's better.
All right.
Okay.
This is my first Instagram live.
Okay. Wait, where'd you go? There you are. Okay.
All right, I'll just hold it.
What, are you on a phone or?
I am. Yep, she told me to log in on my phone.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But yeah, now I can see you and it looks great. But I'm Shannon Clark with Babies After 35, and I was just telling everybody that you are joining me. You are a fellow donor egg mom, right?
I am. Yes.
This is so exciting. I love having these conversations because, and we'll get all into it. But I just want to let everybody know how we got connected. It was through Donor Egg Bank USA, and Michelle is joined through Donor Egg Bank USA's account, so you'll know how to get a hold of them. So I know some people over there, and I was like kind of brainstorming with them about what some things we can do, since I have been very vocal from the very beginning about being a donor egg mom. And they said, hey, I think there's somebody you want to talk to, and it was you. So thank you for taking your time today to do this. Tell me a little bit about yourself, or tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
So I am infertility warrior from Maine. My husband and I have been trying to conceive for 7 years, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. And we went through the gamut of all the different infertility treatments, and really excited to talk about donor eggs today. That's how we got our miracle babies.
Perfect. Yeah. So do you have twins?
I do. Identical twins.
Yeah, and I have twins, non-identical, because it's a boy and a girl. But let's start from the very top. So you can go first. The first question is going to be, why did you use donor eggs?
So we use donor eggs a large part because we don't have infertility coverage here in Maine. And so every chance that we use with my eggs would cost thousands of dollars. And we were informed about this donor egg assurance program through the Donor Egg Bank. And that came with a money back guarantee if you don't end up with a baby. And really our ultimate goal is we wanted a baby. And we just couldn't lose any more money trying. So that's how we ended up with donor eggs.
Yeah, I had no idea about that. I had went through 5 cycles of IVF with myself. Out of the 16 eggs that made it to genetic testing, because I was doing this between ages 40 to 42, out of the 16 eggs that were able to be genetically tested, only 1 was chromosomally normal. That was received or achieved in the 3rd cycle that I did, but that transfer was not successful. We did 2 more, and then with that being unsuccessful, we did decide to use donor eggs. So that's why we went to it, to donor eggs. For me, it was not an easy jump after considering everything I had been through in the 5 cycles myself. For you, was it a hard decision to make?
It really wasn't. In fact, once we found out that there was that I could use donor eggs, and I was feeling hopeless, like we couldn't keep trying with my eggs and it wasn't going to be successful. And so once we found out, hey, the chances of success using donor eggs are so much higher for someone your age and for your outcome that you've had so far for infertility treatments, I just had so much hope that we could finally have our baby.
Yeah, I think for me, and of course, money is an issue. You spend a lot of money. I mean, you do, especially when you get to the point that we both got to. Looking back, it's not that I would have never done donor eggs. I don't know why I did 5 cycles for myself. I don't know why. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to answer that question. Looking back though, I think that being over age 40 and having gone through maybe 3 cycles where I wasn't getting chromosomally normal eggs, I probably should have called it a day then. but that's okay. I went through 2 more cycles, and I guess that's whatever I needed to do to feel that I had tried my best. And I think it's going to be that way for everyone. It's different. Some women may feel after 1 cycle that was enough for them before they go to donor eggs. For me, I guess it was 5. But again, it was never, I never had to think for a moment if I could use donor eggs, meaning emotionally, you know, get over that, or mentally get over that. So for me, and maybe you feel the same way, I was actually very thankful that it was an option. What about you?
I was super thankful because, again, I was just feeling so hopeless. And I feel like that was the only chance that we had, you know, logistically to have a baby.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt that way too. I was very thankful that it was available to me. And I actually started feeling excited for the first time in a very long time once we did make that decision. Did you feel the same way?
I was very excited. I was really sort of gearing up that this was going to take as long as it had taken with my own eggs, and it was just such a much shorter process.
Yeah, yeah. So did you have, we're talking about, I mean, yes, we were excited. It wasn't a hard leap, but did you have that one concern that was kind of looming over you once you did say, yes, we're going to do donor eggs? Was there anything that kind of was nagging it maybe? Was there any reservations you had? Did you have any concerns?
Of course, you know, you always have the concern of, am I going to love this child like it was my own egg? And what am I going to tell this child? You know, how am I going to communicate, you know, that we used donor eggs to them? What's that? That's going to be such a difficult conversation.
Well, let's start with the first one. You were concerned about how would you feel? Do you think going from the pregnancy to delivery to where you are now, do you feel any different?
Not one bit.
Yeah.
Not one. These are my babies. And I carried them, and I look at them, and they're mine.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way too. I had a complicated pregnancy. I was in the hospital for 2 months before I had them for some complications. And I think that was probably the part where I felt the most disconnected, not because they were donor egg babies, but I was afraid I was going to lose them. And I think that I was kind of doing some self-preservation in preparation that I might lose them. And so there was a period of time in my pregnancy where I wasn't bonding. And I realize that now, but I think it was out of my own self-preservation. And again, it wasn't because they were donor egg babies. It was just the circumstance. But, you know, from the moment they came into this world at 31 weeks and they were in the NICU, and even now they're 4. How old are your twins?
They're 6 months.
They're 6. Oh, you're a brand new mom. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that mine are 4 now. You know, of course I noticed some little nuances about them and little things that I, you know, wonder, you know, where that came from. But personality wise and things, you know, I'm not any less bonded to them at all. And I've never have been. They, you know, even, I think I was more worried about not being bonded to them because they were separated. They were in the NICU for 6 weeks than I was that they were donor egg babies. You know, meaning being away, not having them home right away because they were in the NICU for 6 weeks. That worried me more. Were your babies in the NICU at all?
One of the babies was in the NICU, but only for 7 days.
Oh, good. That's good. Yeah. So that was probably a bigger worry to me than about the bonding, was just being in them being in the NICU.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you know, I have times that they'll make a face or I'll look at them and I'll be like, oh, that reminds me of me. And other people will say, oh, they look like you. And I have that sort of moment where it's like, no, that's, you know, but still feel.
I mean, I have people all the time. My husband's biracial, and my twins are blonde hair, blue eyed. I have big blue eyes. So people naturally, they think they look more like me than they do them. And you know, and again, we can talk about this later about the conversation you have with other people, but you know, it's funny some of the ways conversations go when it gets there, but we'll get to that. So how did you go about finding the egg donor, the one that you decided to go with? What was the process like?
Really funny. So you know, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. So we looked at every single donor on the website, just hundreds of donors. And I was making lists and columns, and I was trying to choose people who, you know, looked like me, had, you know, minimal medical history. And I had it narrowed down. It took weeks, and narrowed it down to the top 10. And we didn't even end up going with anyone who was in our top 10 because ultimately, you know, the donor egg bank offered us someone who is considered a proven donor, meaning that they've had other people have been successful using their eggs.
Okay.
And that was what was most important to us. And so we ended up just going with who they offered to us.
Okay. Okay. Well, but just so people know, there are Donor Egg Bank USA. So you can go through the donor egg banks, but also some of the fertility specialists or fertility offices have their own donor egg program within their office. And, you know, you can do either way. We didn't use the donor eggs, donor egg candidates that were in my specific fertility office. We used an egg bank as well. But with us, that was probably one of the harder parts for me is I started looking, we picked 2 different donor egg banks just to go through the registry. And I started looking, and that was a little hard for me. I think trying to go filter all through the different women and the candidates. So what I told my husband, I said, listen, I want you to do this. You start looking and you try to find, you know, we pick the top 5 things that are the most important to us. Let me know when you get a few candidates. Well, my husband went crazy looking all across the country and all these, and I was like, honey, this is not Match.com. We're not trying to find a date. We're trying to find a donor egg. So you don't have to be that crazy. I said, let's narrow it down to our area where we live, someone that's local. Here's our top 5 criteria that are most important to us. And I had to narrow it down to 5. Otherwise, the list would have just went on for days. He found 3 people that met those top 5 criteria, someone that was local. And we ended up getting our #1 choice because she was available. And I don't think that she had, I think we were her first cycle, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. But that's how it worked out for us. So I kind of had to rein my husband in just a little bit. But I think for me, it was a little bit hard to go through the registry. Was it hard for you at all?
It was just very time consuming, and you're looking for the perfect person. And when you think about, you know, people who have babies naturally, you know, nobody has perfect DNA.
That's exactly what I told my husband. I said, you're not going to find the golden egg because I'm not perfect. I'm far from perfect. So we can't try to find someone that's perfect to, you know, to use their eggs. That's not quite fair. So once we kind of let that go a little bit, then it became a little bit of an easier process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We talked about the process. Okay. Okay. So for the process, we talked a little bit about that. I talked about was the easiest and the hardest part. So the easiest part for the process was that the donor registries are pretty easily navigated. I mean, there's a lot of criteria because you can it's kind of like a drop down menu, if you will. You could pick hair color, eye color, height, weight, education level. But there's a lot of other things, and then they pull up the candidates. So the way it's very user friendly. But I think, you know, then going through each candidate and looking at what all the information they put in, because they're required to submit a lot of information, that can get pretty tedious. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, because I read every single thing that was posted in their profile.
Yeah, and because they are required to go through rigorous testing, and then they go through even more testing once they're picked. So, and you know, with some caveats that every donor egg bank is a little bit different for what the requirements are, and also state to state is different too, what the requirements are for donor egg donors. So yeah, so it's very rigorous, and there's a lot of information to go through. My husband did all that, thank God. So that was easy for me. Yeah. Once you decide, is a good question. Once you decided to use donor eggs, how long from your decision to use donor eggs until you were getting that embryo transfer?
So I think we made the decision after first hearing about donor eggs during a consult at our fertility clinic, and that was in March of last year, or 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it was September of the following year was when we did the transfer. And the reason that it took so long is that we had to come up with the large sum of money to be able to afford the treatment.
Yeah.
So we actually enrolled in the program in July and did the transfer in September.
So a year and a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for us, from the time we decided, it actually went really quick when maybe 3 to 4 months before she was doing the retrieval. And then maybe another month for me to do the transfer, but we transferred and it didn't take. And so we had one failed transfer with donor eggs. And that was probably the most devastated I was out of everything, all the IVF cycles, out of everything that I had done with myself, that first failed transfer with donor eggs was completely devastating. And I think that happened in October and November of 2015. And we almost gave up. And it was really, really tough on both of us, because we had put so much hope into this, because we're going to use donor eggs, you know, it's going to work. So we took a trip to kind of regroup, and it was over New Year's of 2016, and then came back and decided we would try one more time, made that transfer, and it did take. So that's how we ended up with our twins. Yeah, it's pretty special. Okay, but you had twins and they're identical.
They are. So we made a very conscious decision to only transfer one embryo, because using donor eggs, you know, is, our doctor told us that's the rate of success is much higher with donor eggs.
Yeah.
And the risk involved with carrying multiples and you know, premature delivery. So we actually had transferred 2 embryos when I used my own eggs. When we used the donor eggs, we made that choice to only transfer 1, and it split, and we got twins.
Yeah. So you had mono-dyad twins. That's so. And you know, I think I was reading somewhere the chances of that happening is like 2% or less.
Yeah.
Right.
It's really rare.
You were really meant to have twins.
Yes. Yes.
Even though you tried to avoid it happening, but you bring up a very good point about the risk. And the reason why we transferred 2 is because I had already had failed embryo transfers, and I was almost 42. And even though I got my twins and they're happy and healthy, I almost lost them multiple times. I was in the hospital for 2 months, and there was a very complicated and risky pregnancy. It was very hard on me. And, you know, I think before anybody decides to transfer 2 embryos under any circumstance, that you have a really important conversation with your doctor before making that decision, because, and I still think about it. I think I have what's called infertility PTSD. And I think that's a really valid thing. And I'm 4 years out of having them, and I still think about it. It still haunts me in a little bit of a way. So I guess the thinking of the what if, you know, because I did transfer 2. And I'm still, don't get me wrong, I'm still grateful they're here, but you know, I'm still a mom who went through this, and I still think about that what if I had lost them? So I do think it's a very good point that you make, that you think about transferring 2 versus 1, especially with donor eggs, because the success rate is higher. And then what the potential complications could be if you have twins. And I'm sure your doctor talked to you about that as well.
He did, and that we thought we were absolutely going to transfer 2, and after we had that conversation with him, and my husband and I talked, we decided we just couldn't take that risk.
Yeah, I agree. We already talked about one of the questions I had written down to ask was about whether or not we would love or accept a donor conceived child as their own. So we both already talked about how it wasn't really a concern of ours, but a lot of women have reached out to me, and I'm sure you've talked to a lot of women as well. That's probably their biggest concern, is that they're not going to feel the same way. So if someone were to tell you that, I'm at the point where I probably need to use donor eggs, but I can't get over that hump. I can't reconcile in my mind, or I'm still worried that I'm not going to accept it, or maybe the baby will feel different about me. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say in my experience, and in the experience of the people that I know who have gone through egg donor, I have not heard that as when the babies are here, the baby's here, that they felt that way.
Yeah, I haven't either. And, you know, but I can understand. I'm not trying to invalidate those feelings at all, because it's very common to feel that way for women many women who go towards egg donor or at that point. And it is sometimes a little bit of a hump that people have to get over. And there's also things to consider as far as family acceptance, spousal acceptance. Sometimes the couple are not on the same page, and that's even more difficult. Cultural acceptance. So there are many things to consider when going towards egg donor, and I completely understand that. I think the best thing to do is talk to somebody, talk it out, see a therapist. And a lot of the fertility centers and the donor egg bank registries, which the one I used, they had a therapist on staff, and I did talk to her. So those resources are available as well. Was that something that you did, or when
we did?
You were going through the process?
It was required to do the assurance program. We had to meet with a therapist for a consult. And it was required, but I am so glad that we did it, because she really brought up things to think about that we had never even
Mhm.
considered, and it really
Like what?
helped us.
Do you
Um,
remember?
yeah, so she, one is, how to talk, what are the resources for when and how to talk to the child about how
Mhm.
they were conceived. The sibling registry, which I had never heard of.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Whether or not to use an anonymous donor or
Mhm.
not. These were
Okay,
all
so wait,
things
wait.
that
Let's go through those. I want to hit those three things. What was the
okay.
first thing you said?
What was the first thing I
How to
said? We
talk.
did how to talk to them when, to let them know how they were conceived.
Yeah. So, how are you going to tell your babies? Am I going to? Of course, I'm going to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell them. There's actually some really good books that are out, and I'm sure by the time they're ready to know, and they're 4. I'm not going to have that conversation with them now. They're 4. They're not going to understand. They'll probably run off and pick their nose somewhere. I mean, they're not going to understand. But I think, as a mom and as a parent, and with your spouse, you kind of have to gauge what their maturity level is, and when they start asking things. And I think you'll know the right time. There are some great IVF books too that you can just put into your reading circulation. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the specifics, but about different ways of being conceived, and kind of work up to that. And so that's kind of what we're doing. But when they're ready, I will tell them. I have no problem telling them. So as far as the family goes, I put my stuff on social media. I went straight and
Mm-hmm.
I wrote about it. I wrote it in the Washington Post about it. I wrote in Huffington. I mean, I was very transparent. And I want to say here that just because Michelle and I are transparent about it and talking about it does not mean you are expected to or have to. It's our personal decision to do that. And it doesn't mean anything less of you if you don't want to. That is a familial decision. That's a decision on your part. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree.
Yeah,
Yep,
I think
absolutely.
with social media, sometimes people feel that they have to reveal too much too soon, and you don't have to. It was just our choice, and it's what worked for us. But telling the family, like, was your family ever an issue about talking to them about what process you were going through?
No, I think it was so foreign to them that they really didn't understand.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they even fully understand now.
Yeah.
But I would say that was a concern of mine is my family going to love the babies like they're our own as well?
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's true, and that I hear that as well. I haven't experienced that. There's no difference, and I'm very thankful for that. But those are all things to consider. So, what was the second thing you said that your therapist talked to you about? Well, you said three great
Um,
things.
there's the sibling registry and then the anonymous versus
Okay.
known donor.
So let's talk about anonymous versus known. What did you do?
We did anonymous only because the donor that was offered to us was anonymous.
Mhm.
And we would have been okay either way. In fact, there's probably a small part of me that wishes that we had maybe slowed down to think about that a little bit more. Because, down the road, if our girls ever have questions about, who the egg donor was, we're not going to have that. The information that we have is what we have.
Yeah. So for me, I kind of went a little off script. When I was going through the process and we had picked our donor, the registry had asked me to write her a letter before her retrieval, just expressing thanks or whatever was on my heart or mind at the time. And I said, I can't write that. I said, do you think she would be interested in meeting me? And they really hadn't done that. And they said, well, we'll ask. And she said yes. So I met her and her son and her husband. And it was just me, though. I didn't take my husband. I said, I want to do this on my own. I'm going to meet her. It ended up working out. We actually are in contact. It's not like we have lunches and dinners and all that, but I know how to get a hold of her. She knows how to get a hold of me. We even did a photo shoot when I was pregnant, right before I went into the hospital, not knowing what was going to happen. And I was around 20 weeks or so when we did that together, which I'm very grateful for. So she did end up meeting my husband that way. But that's not typical. I think most donors the donor egg recipient and the donor do remain anonymous. And I think that's more typical, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was a little off script, but it's what worked for our family, and she was fine for it. We talked about that meeting, and then the last thing, the sibling registry. What is a sibling registry?
So sibling registry, my understanding is that you sort of register your children I'm not sure how it works. I have to look into it more. But if an egg donor has multiple lots of eggs and other people have children using those same eggs, some female, some male, it could be a problem if, the world is small, if a female and a male get together,
Yeah.
not knowing that they came from the same egg donor. And so this is a way to register.
Yeah, and we're in the process of doing that actually. So we are going to be a part of the sibling registry, just so we know who they, not necessarily who they are, but where they are and all of that. So it's something that's offered, but it's not something that you have to do. But it's what we want to do. So we are going to participate in that. And I think most donor egg banks or donor registries do offer that as well. So that is something to consider. Okay. If you had to give some advice to someone heading down a similar path that we went through, are there any things that you wish you'd known that you know now having gone through it?
I think probably the best thing that I ever did was join some of the online support groups. Any question I had about infertility treatment, donor egg, that's where I learned about donor egg. I had never heard of that before. And I think the more support that you get from people who are going through it, the better. And I think that just changed everything for us when we got that support.
Yeah, I didn't do the online group. For me, I think the one thing I would probably recommend, I would definitely recommend seeing a therapist through the process. I would recommend seeing a therapist going through infertility treatments, infertility in general. That's the one thing I look back on and I really wish I had done, because I spent a lot of time going through that. Even though my husband was supportive and my family was supportive, it's very isolating and lonely in some ways. And I think I realized there was a lot of feelings that I had that I didn't deal with at the time. So I think once you start going through the process of going through fertility treatments and having losses and failed transfers and all that, it's really important that you have someone that you could talk to that's not your spouse, that's not in your friend group, that's not your family, someone that can be more objective and really help you through that, and have that one person you can go through. So I really recommend therapy. I think that's something I would recommend that anybody do that's going through this.
I agree.
For sure. Okay, let's start answering some questions here. I think there's a lot. Let me start from the top. Just a second. Don't want to miss anything. Did you use fresh or frozen embryos? So typically, most donor egg cycles are going to be frozen. Even though I was 42-ish, 42, she was much younger, so we didn't have to do the testing, but it just, to coordinate her and my uterus and her eggs, we used frozen. So basically they retrieved the eggs from her, fertilized them with my husband's sperm, and then the embryos were frozen. What did you do?
So I guess it's considered fresh. Her eggs were frozen. They thawed them, and my husband's sperm was fresh, and then we transferred 5 days later.
So I guess it depends on what you're calling fresh or frozen. So there was parts fresh and parts frozen. So
right.
So if you think about it this way, there are some ways you can get eggs that are already frozen, and you pick from the registry that way. Or you can pick a donor to where she's dedicated to you and all the eggs you retrieve from her go to you. So that might be what you're considering a fresh donor. That's what we did. And then once they immediately retrieved them from her, they were fertilized with my husband's sperm, and we got all of the eggs that whatever, we ended up getting 5 embryos total. All the embryos and all the eggs that were retrieved. Versus if you can also have eggs that have already been retrieved, have already been frozen, and then do it that way. So I guess maybe that's what they're meaning. Maybe fresh or frozen. You think?
Yeah.
So fresh versus frozen donor. That's the difference. Okay. Recs for donor programs. So how did you choose Donor Egg Bank USA?
That was the program affiliated with my fertility clinic that offered the assurance program. And so that's what we went with.
Yeah, so I think that's a good, you also brought a great point. A lot of them are now having their assurance programs, and a lot of fertility centers have recommendations, especially if they don't have their own donor egg bank within them, which some of them do. But even then, like I said, mine did, but I still went to a different egg bank because that's where we found our candidate or our egg donor. Knowing which donor egg banks they have a good track record with, that they know the success with, they know the people that work there and how they treat their patients, and they know what their reputation is. Most fertility centers are going to know which donor egg banks they recommend. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that'd be the first place to start.
We're pretty rural. I mean, here, there's only one fertility clinic in the state for us. Okay. And they work with one donor egg bank assurance program. So
gotcha. And that's the other thing. Yeah, looking at, finding what your fertility center recommends and who they work with, and also what programs each donor egg bank has, like the assurance program. And there's variations of that. And just talk a little bit again what the assurance program means.
So the assurance program guarantees you have it's a big lump sum payment, and you get up to 6 lots of eggs. So if you go through, they thaw out the lot of eggs, you combine it with the sperm, do the transfer, say you get 5 embryos, the first transfer is unsuccessful, you continue to go through transfers until you use up that lot of eggs. And if you're still not successful, you move on to the next lot of eggs. And you can do that up to 6 lots of eggs, or when either party determines that it's probably not going to work. But you basically keep trying until you bring home a baby.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so looking for those types of programs, it's called assurance program, is key as well. Because it's going to depend also what your financial situation is and how much money you have to spend. That can also dictate what kind of donor egg bank you're using and what their assurance programs are. And I think Donor Egg Bank USA is really good about that. And so using them and knowing what's available is key to picking that donor egg bank as well. Yeah. And
the wonderful thing is that, if this wasn't successful for us, it's 100% money back. And so we could, then move on to other options at that point. We wouldn't be out all of that money.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, that's important too. So PGT testing of the donor. So doing the preimplantation genetic testing on a young female is not necessarily recommended. I didn't test mine. Did you test yours?
Nope, they did not test our donor either.
But you can test them. But generally, the age range of the donors that are donating their eggs is not going to be of concern as far as genetics go. Not to say that it can't happen. Of course, it can happen, but that is an additional cost. We did not use it. We did not do testing of ours. So it's a conversation you should have with your fertility doc about whether or not PGT testing is indicated or needed.
We'd actually gone through with my eggs. We had gone through PGT testing and transferred normal embryos and still lost the pregnancies. So for us, it was a younger donor, and it didn't guarantee that it was going to be successful.
Yeah. What things are important to consider when you choose a donor? So that question. So I think that's up to the individual, whether you're going through this by yourself or the couple who's going through it together. We had our 5 most important things, and I'll tell you what they were. I used to not say, but I'll say it now. I'm far enough out. Because I'm a redhead with blue eyes, I wanted more recessive features. There's not a whole lot of redheads donating their eggs, so I more of like a lighter hair color is what we picked. Blue eyes, the height similar to mine, weight similar to mine, and then education level. Those were the 5 things that were most important to us. And we kind of let everything else go. And believe it or not, going through all the donors, we did at the time. Of course, there's probably more donors now. We only ended up with 3 that met all 5 criteria. What were the things that were most important to you, if you want to share, that were most important to you when considering a donor? Yeah.
So the things that were most important, medical history, not only in the donor, but in their family, mental health history, substance use history, and genetic testing.
So, okay, so that was the second question. What kind of test should you ask for the donor? So the donor egg bank is really good, and the fertility center is really good about doing all this stuff that's required And then if you want anything additional, so there are things that you can opt in for additional testing if need be. So we can't go through all of that because it's very expansive what they test for, but just knowing up front what the donor is going to be tested for is key. So you could add in anything if there's something that you want specifically to be tested for. Is that how they kind of approached it with you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what did you decide, or what did your donor decide about using unused eggs or embryos? So for me, we got 5 embryos. The first transfer, the first 2 has failed. The transfer, the second 2 worked, and we have 1 still on ice, if you will. We haven't decided what to do with that. That's a very personal decision. You know, it's up to the family. My husband briefly mentioned this year about potentially, and I looked at him, I said, not with me. I'm 47. I'm not, I can't do another pregnancy. The other one was too difficult, but we don't know. We don't know what we're going to do. We have a little more time to decide. But when you go through donor eggs, whatever you get is yours, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And then again, deciding on what to do with whatever is left over is kind of up to you.
Yeah.
There's no right answer.
No, and we've been struggling with that as well. And, you know, we're pretty sure that we're done. You know, I don't want to go through another pregnancy again. I'm going to be 43 next week.
Yeah.
It's expensive. You know, right now I'm back to work and we're paying for, you know, daycare for 2 infants. And so logistically, it's just, we're done. But that's such a hard decision because that's it. If, you know, if we don't have those embryos anymore, that's our last chance.
Yeah.
And then what to do with them, you know, those are, you know, potential siblings for our girls, and they're, you know, babies to be. And it's really hard to think about just, you know, getting rid of those.
Let me go. Yeah, I know it is a tough decision. So yeah, I can't answer that question, honestly, because I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. I'm still trying to figure it out myself. My husband is as well with the one we have left. So I wish I could give you some profound response and clarification, but I don't know. I don't know. Okay, well, I think we went through all the questions. I really think, thank you for being here with me today. I think this is a great discussion. I think anytime women such as yourself are willing to talk about it and be transparent about it, it helps so many women and gets so many questions answered. And so I really do appreciate you doing this.
Oh, thanks for having me and allowing me to talk about it. I think it's so important that these discussions, you know, if you're comfortable, that we have these discussions.
I agree. I always say, and I mentioned it earlier, that, you know, it's not everybody's thing to be transparent and talk about it to the world. But for those of us that are comfortable doing it and are okay with doing it, we'll kind of do it for you. We'll, you know, educate and do that. And that's kind of how I looked at it. And I am thankful I did. And I'm sure you are too, because of the response that I get every time I do something like this. I'm so glad you talked about this. There's nobody I could talk to about it. I didn't know this was an option for me, or I was afraid of doing this. And you know, just having these conversations can just help women make decisions.
Absolutely. And again, if I hadn't had somebody that talked to me about donor eggs, I wouldn't be here.
Right. Well, there you go. So if you guys have any other questions, you can private message me here at Babies After 35. And then also Donor Egg Bank USA, you can also contact them there. And that's the account you're coming from. So if you have any questions, Donor Egg Bank USA is available to answer those questions as well. All right. Thank you so much, Michelle. Have a wonderful day. And again, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.